and dusted.
Because he was criticised so heavily when he was photographing working class people in the north of England. I think in a way, he's sometimes used his interest in the middle class to deflect criticism from that work. He is able to say now, look, I've made middle class people look really, look kind of bizarre, so you can't really criticise me for anything.
They were taken with a macro lens, which is a lens that has the ability to come in very close, and this is combined with a ring flash, which is where you get a flash on either side of the lens. This means you can photograph anything very quickly in sort of studio conditions. So you get rid of the emotion, you get rid of the sunlight, you get rid of anything that may tarnish it with sentimentality. So you get the object coming and shining through in a very clear way. America, England, Ireland, France, Ireland, Bangladesh, what was that? Spain, Ireland, America, England, America, Spain, Thailand, England, Spain, America, England, Bangladesh, England, can't remember, Japan, England.
Wow.
Etc.
You know them all, still?
Yeah, of course, yeah. These are my babies. No, they're my children, There's my daughter, in fact. I think the one thing that perhaps I learnt when I went through the process of doing this retrospective was to understand how, when I started out being a photographer in the 70s, it was a much more innocent time. And I guess, I came from middle-class Surrey, I moved up to the north of England, and I think I was transfixed and wanted to celebrate the life, the traditional working-class life that I found in Britain in the 70s. By the time of the 90s, my view of the world had become a lot more cynical, a lot more jaundiced, and I guess my work gradually and slowly in this time, and it's not exclusively the only thing that went on, changed from being a celebration of society to a critique of society. Now, I don't know whether in this 30-year period we have lost our innocence forever, or whether in 1950 people were saying, well, if you thought about 1920, it was much more innocent than it is in 1950. But for me, because I've lived through this time, it's a very different world that we live in now to what it was when I started out studying photography in the early 70s. So I guess because I'm very aware of trying to make photography relevant and poignant to the society in which we live, I felt almost a responsibility to be critical. That's not entirely the only agenda that my work shows, but to have a critique as well as a celebration. Because part of what I'm interested in doing as a photographer is expressing my own ambivalence. I like the world, but I'm worried about the world. So I like England and I hate England simultaneously. So what photography can do, much better than I can ever achieve with words, is to talk about this ambiguity and talk about an apparent contradiction.
And I think it was in '86 he had the exhibition of The Last Resort at the Serpentine Gallery in London, and that was when his work got exposed to a much, much bigger audience, because it was in London and because the Serpentine Gallery was an important venue. So that was when people really started talking about it. That was when Martin got well known in Britain, was with The Last Resort. He was one of the first non-commercial people in Britain to work in colour. Yeah, and it was, those were the days where if somebody worked in colour, it would actually say colour photographs by. It would actually be a kind of newsworthy thing that it was colour. Martin was a leader in that. Yeah, and because that was at the time when he was doing quite a lot of teaching, a lot of other people started to work in colour as well. So it was revolutionary and radical in its time.
This was a commission for a French organisation called Centre Régional de la Photographie Nord-Pas-de-Calais. This is where they commissioned me to come and photograph on the ferry boats or people getting cheap drink between Britain and France. English people arriving in the invasion in Calais and Boulogne and having lunch, getting pissed, going to the hypermarket, buying the cheap beer. And of course that's the time I choose to go because I want to find it at its most vulnerable. And people buying drink as if it's about to be going out of fashion and you're never going to see it again. I'm creating fiction out of reality, so you have to make sure that the situation is more energised and more energetic than it is normally. You know, you have to exaggerate your case.
It's a fiction, then?
Well, no, I'm making fiction out of reality. You know, I'm a subjective photographer. You know, I'm choosing and isolating things that I think are important. It's not meant to be a particularly fair or true documentation. It's a subjective documentation. And came up with this idea of photographing in bad weather conditions. We're obsessed by the weather in Britain. We're always discussing it. And I like the idea because photographers traditionally are only meant to go out when it's sunny, of only going out when it was raining and wet and miserable. This is a rained-off Jubilee street party from 1977. I also challenged myself to try and photograph in the most boring places that I could find. So I went to motorway service stations, supermarket car parks. I began to realise that photographers are attracted to things that are very exotic. And I wanted to get away from that and challenge myself in a different way. So whenever the weather was bad, I would go to these places and see if I could come up with an interesting photograph. I also began to realise how subjective photography can be. If you look at this bandstand, taken at night in Halifax, you look at this photo here, taken a few moments later, entirely different photographs, but exactly the same scene. So which one is telling the truth? Well, we know that photographers can interpret things to make them look different. So if you know that this subjectivity you can use, I wanted to apply it and make it work for me by changing the way I photograph things through the subjectivity inherent in photography.
His parents were really keen bird watchers, and although he's always said that he deeply objected to being taken on these bird watching trips, there was something about this watching. You know, they were looking for birds. I know it sounds a bit crude, but you can't help but say, you know, they were watching for birds and Martin was watching for peoples.
My father in particular was an obsessive bird watcher, and therefore when I was young he would take me out on bird watching. He used to ring birds, which is where you catch in nets, put a little metal ring in, let them go, and then when they're re-caught you can trace migration patterns. I guess what's interesting for me, you know, he did this in a very obsessive, meticulous manner, and I guess I've inherited his genes, although my interests are different. One of the collections I have are trays with photographs on. I hope eventually to do an exhibition of photographic trays. Not in great shape, but it'll do. Although I quite like the shabbiness of it. Here is the, you see, look at the difference. This is very amusing. There's the original image. A little bit more colourful, the tray. And here is a double bed. And in the corner, part of the National Photographic Tray Collection. There's another Butlins one. Another Butlins one. £4. Here's some big ones. Nice English scene. Right, so how many have we got? 1, 2, 3, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. Not bad.
Yeah.
29. No, I'm fascinated by how different, photographs enter into society. So this is one particular study that I'm pursuing. Part of my thesis is that, photography is such an integral part of society, and therefore the best way to prove that is to get as many different objects as one can find that feature photographs. Now, we could go upstairs and look at my wallpaper collection, if you like. What's this? Star Trek wallpaper? Beatles wallpaper. This is literally taken from a demolished house, or a house about to be demolished in Manchester. Skateboarding. The best of all, Concorde wallpaper.
So books were a tremendously important form of communication about photography, and everybody wanted to have a book published of what they did, because it was seen as the authentication of independent photography, was if it was in a book. And I guess for Martin it comes from that, and also he's very keen on collecting.
I mean, I really believe in the book as a way of presenting photographs. It's very appropriate, and I like the idea you can play around with the design, narrative, quality of printing, different ways of presenting images and ideas through the book. I mean, the top two shelves here, are Dutch, and the Dutch have made very good photographic books. Van de Kuken. This is his Paris book, Paris Motel. Classic book from, I think this is done in the 60s. Oh, 56, earlier than I thought. 58. Yeah. Well, he was an interesting original photographer. His first was We Are 17. Mm-hmm. He was influenced, of course, as were many, by Klein's New York. Again, great atmosphere about Paris. Beautifully presented, beautifully printed.
Hans van der Meer there.
I buy prints of photographers. So,
and these prints are from?
This is from his first football book. I think he's a very good, underrated Dutch photographer. I thought this is I was very impressed with this book. I thought it was a wonderful book. It's a combination of sports photography and landscape photography. And it just shows the sort of small intimacy of amateur football with humour. And it was just a great book. Very original. And I'm doing a book about graphic books for Phaidon, and this will be included. And this is a great way for me to basically take out the things in photography that I think have been overlooked. No, in Holland he's well known and established, especially in the last 2-3 years, but not so much when this came out, although he's been a photographer for a long time. And it's only now that maybe he's getting some wider recognition outside of Holland.